Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. Congress has passed a critical short-term funding bill, narrowly avoiding a government shutdown. 34 House Republicans joined Democrats in voting to keep the government running through December 3rd. The legislation now goes to President Biden's desk. We will take you to the White House for the signing when it happens. It comes as President Biden is searching for common ground between moderate and progressive Democrats. West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin told reporters he would not support spending more than $1.5 trillion over 10 years on a social spending package. But progressives are insisting the party pass the previous $3.5 trillion compromise. President Biden had originally proposed $6 trillion in climate and public spending. Manchin suggested there are some areas where the two sides just won't agree.
Basically take whatever we aren't able to come to agreement with today and take that on the campaign trail next year, and I'm sure that they'll get many more liberal, progressive Democrats with what they say they want.
In response to the internal opposition, Congressional Progressive Caucus Chair Pramila Jayapal called on her party to come together to support the president's agenda.
Obviously, Senator Manchin made it even more clear that we still have work to do on reconciliation. This isn't even close to being done. So let's take a little bit more time. Let's do it thoughtfully. Let's have Manchin and Sinema and anyone else tell us exactly what they are willing to vote for. Because remember, this is the president's agenda that we all ran on and won on. So I thought we were all on the same page in terms of wanting to deliver on it. If there are things that they want to cut out, tell us what those things are, and let's come to the table as Democrats to pass the Democratic agenda, the president's agenda.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said they will continue to work with Senator Manchin on a final number.
The way the president sees it is that this is an ongoing discussion, an ongoing negotiation. Here's what we know. We know that timelines help make progress. We've seen that play out over the course of the last couple of days. We know that compromise is inevitable. We've also seen that play out over the last couple of days. And right now, we're clearly in the thick of it.
Let's bring in Major Garrett, Weijia Jiang, Trevor Hunnicutt, and Eliza Relman. Major is CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent. Weijia is CBS News Senior White House Correspondent. Trevor is a White House reporter for Reuters. And Eliza is a Senior Politics reporter at Business Insider. Welcome to all of you. Major, we needed more than a quad box today because we have a lot to discuss. So let me start with you. While Congress managed, yes, you see that? We don't often have this many boxes. No. But with Congress managing to avert a government shutdown at the 11th hour, can this, though, be called a victory?
Anytime you avoid a government shutdown, it's a victory. Small victory, to be sure, but right now the Biden White House needs to find victories wherever it can find them, and here it has been worked out. So there'll be no government shutdown. The next big-ticket item that will rattle the markets and has already a little bit today is the debt ceiling. That's going to get worked out, but only with Democratic support. It will be a little bit more difficult to work out. And then come the two big-ticket items, infrastructure and the so-called reconciliation or Build Back Better bill. And right now it appears that Washington is in a position where Democrats feel the need to prove to each other, that is to say, moderates you referred to, and the progressive Democrats, we can each kill your own bill. It seems like that's what both sides have to go through, and then see the tattered remains of those nearly dead pieces of legislation before they realize that two pieces of dead legislation don't advance the president's agenda, don't help Democrats prepare for the midterm elections, and certainly won't help Terry McAuliffe, who's trying to hold on to a lead in Virginia, the governor's race this November, one that will be a weather vane for Democrats as they head into those midterm elections. But it appears right now, if you're looking at the psychology, the rhetoric of Democrats, and everything around this, that these two things have to have a near-death experience before Democrats, moderates, and progressives will link arms and try to resuscitate them.
All right, we're going to talk more about that Virginia contest a bit later in the show. But Eliza, given everything that Major just laid out and the stakes here, are we going to see a vote on infrastructure? And if we don't, does that mean it is dead?
So we're hearing mixed messages from Congress right now. Speaker Pelosi, has insisted today that she will hold a vote. We're hearing from moderate Democrats on the Hill that they want to hold a vote on the infrastructure bill today. But of course, as we saw from Pramila Jayapal earlier, progressives say they do not want to hold a vote until they have agreement on this larger social spending bill. So it's unclear still whether there will be a vote today.
Well, Weijia, President Biden canceled his trip to Chicago trying to salvage these two legislative priorities. What is the White House's response to Senator Joe Manchin's top line for Democrats' social spending bill?
Well, the White House isn't going to draw any new lines about whether they will support that $1.5 trillion number or not. In fact, the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, was pressed about this repeatedly, and she simply would not go there, saying that those conversations are private. But she did express optimism that even though Joe Manchin says that's his final number, that's not really his final number. And she said that negotiations are ongoing. This is just part of the process, really trying to downplay what Major just laid out, which is that both of these pieces of legislation are barely hanging on. And part of the problem is something that Manchin himself brought up today, which is that these two bills are linked together, like it or not. And he has said that, that is a problem, and that's why they are unable to do anything. And so even though the White House has insisted that the president is trying to treat these pieces of legislation separately, in reality, that's just not happening. And that's something that Psaki has really struggled to answer, is why doesn't the president just call up progressives and say, you need to treat these two separately, instead of threatening to hold up infrastructure if there's no vote on reconciliation. But with regard to Manchin, as you asked specifically, again, they're not talking about exactly what he's asking to be taken out to take $2 trillion out of the package. They're not saying whether Arizona's Kirsten Sinema has the same asks that Manchin does. And they're not saying what the president's saying in response to them. And so there's a lot of murkiness here. All that to say the White House isn't saying much at all, except they're optimistic.
So, Trevor, Weijia mentions Arizona Senator Kirsten Sinema. How is her position impacting her back home in Arizona?
Well, Kirsten Sinema is a really interesting figure. I mean, she's a 45-year-old woman. She's part of the young guard, part of one of the new group of Democrats that we have in the Senate. And her background is as a progressive, right, as a Green Party-aligned kind of uber-liberal person. But what she has become in this particular Congress is a person who's standing up for the traditions of old in the party, right? She stood up for the filibuster. She stood up for not putting minimum wage in a COVID relief bill, and now she's standing up for not passing a massive reconciliation package that has lots of different things in it. So that has really hurt her, because that's not where the majority of her party is in Arizona. And they see her as kind of being, way too interested in courting independent voters, suburban voters, and conservative voters in that state, which again is very closely divided. So while she is not up for re-election until 2024. So she's, there's a lot of time between now and then, but she's facing a lot of challenges. Just today, a group said that they were going to put a lot of money behind getting a primary challenger to come out against her. So a lot of pressure on Senator Sinema right now.
Yeah, Trevor, I want to just dig in a little bit deeper on that, because I think some folks, given the background that you just spelled out for Senator Sinema, might, sort of wonder here, and the longer time frame, some folks might not understand, why is it that she is so dug in, or appears to be so dug in, to this very thing that the bulk of her party seems to support? And, interestingly as well, Trevor, I wonder, has she made herself available to reporters as much in Washington? What do you know about that? Because it seems to me we have seen Senator Manchin out before the cameras talking about what it is that he would like to see or doesn't necessarily care for as this negotiation has carried on. But I feel as though she's not someone that we've necessarily heard from directly.
No, she has not spoken publicly during these kind of heated negotiations this week, and her press strategy, such as it is, has been very focused on her constituents back at home, right in Arizona, and in particular, not the party activists or the kind of the progressives who would normally be doing kind of get out the vote for Democrats, but really those kind of moderate, independent voters, and maybe even some conservatives, because I mean, again, she had a very tight race that she's only been elected once statewide, and it was a very tight race against a competitor, Martha McSally, who was viewed as weaker than some alternatives, and so I think she understands that she has to kind of shore up against a challenge on the right just as much as a challenge on the left.
All right, well, Major, switching gears here, longtime Trump ally, and we should say frequent guest on your excellent podcast, The Takeout, Corey Lewandowski. He lost his most recent gig with the former president over allegations of misconduct. What exactly is he accused of? And give us a sense of some of his past issues.
So, yes, Corey Lewandowski has been on The Takeout 3 times. He was our very first guest the day before Donald Trump was inaugurated, the 45th president of the United States. He was a significant player in the entire campaign of Donald Trump for the Republican nomination, and he was a frequent conversationalist with the president all throughout his exile, so to speak, during the latter stages of that campaign and all through his presidency. And he was the leading one of former President Trump's super PACs. He was in Las Vegas over this weekend on Sunday, and I've talked to several people who were there, and Corey Lewandowski is accused by the wife of a prominent Trump super PAC donor of making unwanted sexual advances and doing other things there consistent with somebody who was having way too much to drink, speaking very boastfully about his control within the Trump world, about endorsements and what President Trump does or doesn't do in a political arena, flowing entirely through him. And the super PAC last night separated ties with Corey Lewandowski. Does that mean he will be permanently exiled from former President Trump's political world? I tend to doubt that, but that's the current official position of the Trump super PAC. And Corey Lewandowski, for the moment, as he has been before, is on the outs. He had 2 other episodes. One, a low-level interaction with a reporter in 2016 that was described as an assault, and there was a whole videotape that showed what this encounter was or wasn't. That seemed to be an enormous waterspout at the time. It attracted tremendous attention. It turned out in the end to be kind of a nothing burger. And then he was later accused by a singer of making unwanted advances that bordered on sexual assault or harassment. So Corey Lewandowski has had issues related to his own conduct as someone representing Donald Trump. And he has always survived them. Will he survive this third one? It's unclear. But if I had to bet, and I'm not a betting person, I would say he probably will. It may just take a little while longer for him to get back into that place he's often found himself, which is on the other end of his cell phone with former President Trump.
And any word, Major, directly from Lewandowski himself or members of his legal team or anyone responding to these allegations?
His legal team has said there are lots of rumors and accusations. We'll deal with them if there are any formal charges or police reports filed. To my knowledge, as of this hour, those haven't occurred, so they're waiting to see what kind of legal posture they have to adopt. Corey has not returned any of my phone calls.
What are some other legislative priorities, Weijia, that the president would like to get done next?
Elaine, honestly, until this is done, I don't expect the White House to shift their focus dramatically onto anything else, even though he does have a very hefty, ambitious legislative agenda, because the president ran on, the promise of solving 2 crises, the pandemic and the economic crises that was linked to it. And this really is his plan that he must pass to get that done. And so, I think that you'll see a lot more work ahead on this, especially because, as Eliza, I think, was trying to point out, he has to unify his own party, which is not what he was expecting. He ran on the ability to do so because he was one of the sausage makers himself in Congress. So he has to prove that he can do that, setting bipartisanship aside. He has to do that within his own Democratic Party. But certainly he would love to focus on voting rights, on immigration, especially given mounting pressure from what we're seeing at the southern border, on gun control. But it's just hard to imagine when they'll really earnestly start putting pressure on those items when he has not been able to achieve what is really the crown jewel of his agenda, this pair of infrastructure packages.
Yeah, and one more, Major, let me ask you, based on what Weijia was just spelling out, with respect to political capital here for Joe Biden, what does that calendar realistically look like now? Because when we look at approval ratings and the aftermath of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, when we look at the fact that the pandemic surge with the Delta variant has put this country in a place that, some public health experts weren't necessarily expecting to see, what does that mean for President Biden's political capital moving forward?
Well, let's talk short term and then into next year for the midterm. Short term, what does it mean? Right now, these two items, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, price tag $1.2 trillion, and the Build Back Better, reconciliation $3.5 trillion, are both more popular than the president himself. The president's about 43, 44, 45, depending on the poll. Both of those poll in the high 50s, in some cases in the low 60s. So they're both more popular than he is. That's why he wants to latch on to both of them, because he needs both of them to pull himself up out of where he has found himself in the last 4 to 6 weeks, which is steadily declining poll numbers because independents have pulled away and some Democrats have begun to question the effectiveness of the president's leadership. So for Democrats who are looking at their available alternatives, and the simple truth, Elaine, is in legislative politics, the dollar amount is a direct function of how many votes you can get. If $3.5 trillion on the Build Back Better is not any longer operative, then the number is going to be whatever they can stitch together enough votes to pass, pure and simple. So that number will be driven by the votes. And as Speaker Pelosi said today, we're in the substance now. We're not talking about numbers. We're talking about what's going to be in it. And what's going to be in it will drive how many votes you can get for it. And when they have a majority in the House and Senate, that's when they'll vote on it, and that's when we'll know the number. And from that point, Democrats will then have an important task, if they pass these things, to explain what they have done. One of the great missing elements of this entire conversation in Washington, around the country, Elaine, is what's in it. And I guarantee you, nobody in this audience knows what the difference is between a Build Back Better bill of $3.5 trillion and $2.5 trillion. They just know the number. They don't know what is or isn't at stake, because Democrats have been so busy working on the process, the legislative important details, which do matter. They haven't talked to the country about what they're trying to actually do in specificity. So the country is not aligned with this in any emotional or policy way. So whatever passes, if something does pass, then the Democrats have a very important midterm political obligation. Explain what you have done, show how it changes people's lives for the better, and make that your re-election pitch in the midterms.
All right, we'll wait to see if they get through this process, if that messaging follows with that level of specificity. Major Garrett, Weijia Jiang, Trevor Hunnicutt, and Eliza Relman, thank you all very much.